seemingly carefree, but actually having a dark stomach and enduring traditional handicraft artists versus emotional sluggishness and indifference in the early stage, daring to love and hate models in the later stage. Yun Qing knew very well that Qi Yan married her because her mother's fate was inevitable. After more than 2 years of marriage, he tried every means to force Yun Qing to divorce. Finally, the two divorced successfully, and Yun Qing thought he had completely rid himself of this promiscuous young master. Unexpectedly, this person started various flirtatious activities, sending flowers, cars, and houses, and even brought fashion brand resources for her, hoping to remarry her. Yun Qing looked coldly at it, unable to bear its disturbance. One day, she appeared in front of him with a high-profile arm holding a man of both looks and temperament, and said with a smile, "Let me introduce you to my new love." Qi Yan looked at the man's handsome and stern face, and his anger gradually subsided. He lowered his head and let out a low growl, "Big brother." Note 1, 1v1, male redeems female 2. The female protagonist had a growth process in the early stages, but it was not long. In the middle and later stages, the male and female protagonists are evenly matched, with a longer period of ambiguous flirtation. 3. The male lead is very good. Qi Yan in the introduction is just cannon fodder, not the real male lead, not the story of the prodigal son turning back. Keywords of the novel. After a divorce agreement, I became my sister. In law without a pop-up window. After a divorce agreement, I became my sister. In law. Download the full text of the text. After a divorce agreement, I became my sister. In law. Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Wild Man Murders His Husband. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 1. Wild Man Murders His Husband. Yun Qing didn't expect to come back after more than half a month of going out. The first phone call he received was that his husband Qi Yan had been arrested for involvement in pornography at the club and asked her to go to the detention center to pick him up. She is not surprised by this matter. But strange mother. In law Qi Sueha actually detained her precious son for 10 days this time. When she first married Qi Yan, because she was in a mixed fashion circle, Qi Sueha strictly prohibited her from flirting with other men and attending banquets. Even her assistant was replaced by a woman by the agency. However, Qi Yan's indulging nature in romance not only failed to restrain, but also intensified. Over the past 2 years, she no longer knows how many persistent women she has helped Qi Yan deal with. The reward each time is that Qi Sueha will use his abilities to find some resources that are similar to chicken ribs for her. A haughty posture is like rewarding a pug. Her presence in the Qi family is more like Qi Yan's private life repair station, and when necessary, she also has to shoulder the task of passing on the family line. This marriage did not bring her as much abundant resources as expected. Not only did it not bring her fame and fortune, but also made herself very tired. Yun Qing instructed the driver to turn around and go to the detention center. I received another call from Qi Sueha here, saying that she should go through the formalities first and arrive later. Over 40 minutes later, Yun Qing arrived at the detention center and was informed that Qi Yan had been taken away. She asked, "Who picked it up?" The staff said, "His friend." Yun Qing asked again, "Friends? What are their names?" The staff directly handed the procedures with the other party's signature to Yun Qing. She saw the person signing on it named Jiang Chuan. Yun Qing muttered to herself the words Jiang Chuan, but she didn't remember Qi Yan having a friend named Jiang Chuan. However, she doesn't know all of Qi Yan's friends either. She thanked the staff and walked out of the detention center to call Qi Sueha, informing him that Qi Yan had been taken away. Qi Sueha was not worried at all, as if he had already known about it. I also received a call a few minutes ago, so I haven't had a chance to tell you yet. Yun Qing stood at the entrance of the detention center, gazing at the desolation here, with no taxis coming in front or behind. There is only a bus stop a few hundred meters ahead. She pushed her luggage slowly forward and said, "As long as you know this, I'll go back." Chi Sueha quickly said, "Wait for me at the entrance of the detention center. I'll be there soon." Yun Qing let out a faint hum. Sure enough, within 2 minutes, a black Mercedes-Benz business car stopped in front of her. The driver came down to help her pick up her luggage and put it in the trunk. She bent down and sat in, calling out to Chi Sueha, who was calm and had a strong aura, "Mom." Chi Sueha nodded slightly, his sharp eyebrows and eyes scanning her up and down, as if examining whether he had done anything wrong to her son during the more than 10 days outside. Yun Qing was staring at her awkwardly, then turned around and glanced out the window. When he first got married, Yun Qing was quite enthusiastic about Chi Sueha. Due to Qi Yan's scoundrel and unfilial behavior, she felt pity for this powerful woman who dominated the business world. During that time, she would often go back to see her and talk to her. But soon she realized that Chi Sueha was only trying to please her and was just trying to save their family's money. Yun Qing felt her coldness and saw through her that she was just treating herself as Qi Yan's last resort. Although the Qi family is a wealthy family on the list in He City, few people are willing to let their daughters marry into the Qi family due to Qi Yan's own misconduct and promiscuity. And she was not married into the Qi family, more like being sold into the Qi family by her uncle. The car didn't drive straight onto the main road, but instead got into a winding path, with withered reed roots all over the abandoned farmland on one side. She curiously asked, "Where are we going?" Chi Sueha's voice was the usual cold and sharp. "Pick up Ah Yen." Yun Qing was even more puzzled, didn't Qi Yan be taken away by his friend? Chi Sueha gave her a displeased glance, as if implying that she was talking too much. Yun Qing had to keep silent. An old bungalow with white and red large letters advertising household appliances on the cement wall, as well as some miscellaneous words written in pencil letters. She followed Chi Sueha to get off the car and looked around at the dense forests, with a small river stretching forward in the middle and a narrow dirt road connecting to a road several hundred meters away. Chi Sueha walked inside with her feet raised, knocked on the door with her hand raised, and her voice revealed her rare tenderness. "Ah Yen, I'm Mom." After a moment, Qi Yan slowly opened the door from inside, and his vigilant gaze jumped from Chi Sueha's body to Yun Qing's. His deep and sharp eyebrows and eyes stared closely at Yun Qing, silent Yun Qing had never seen this gaze on Qi Yan's face before. Has a commanding aura that overlooks the world. If she didn't look at the same face, she would suspect that it was a fake. She noticed injuries on his hands, face, and neck, with blood scabs remaining at the wound site. Yun Qingxin thought to himself that Qi Yan had been bullied in the detention center. But it shouldn't be. Chi Sueha couldn't have let Qi Yan be bullied like this. Just as Yun Qing was stunned, Chi Sueha reached out and pulled her up to him. He pretended to look inside and said, "Ah Yan, where are you going to pick up your friend? You don't know if you want your friend to go pick her up. Tell me earlier and let Qing run for nothing." In an instant, Yun Qing clearly felt his tense nerves relax in an instant. Qi Yanyao's black pupils softened a lot, and he responded faintly, "Let's go." His voice was deep and mellow, as if a drop of spring water had fallen into a damp cave in response to the echoes of nature, serene yet distant. Yun Qing seemed to feel that the voice was a bit unfamiliar. But Chi Sueha couldn't have mistaken his son. Yun Qing naturally let go of his doubts. Chi Sueha pushed her to Qi Yan's side and said, gently, "Ah Yan has a wound on his leg. Please help him down." Yun Qing lowered his head and saw a large blood stain on his right calf pants. He reached out to help. Qi Yan raised his hand to avoid, as if she didn't exist, and coldly asked Chi Sueha, "Where is the car?" Chi Sueha pointed to the road ahead and said, "There. This road is too narrow to drive in." He lifted his foot and walked forward. However, just as I took a step out, a strong pain burst from the torn calf wound. He stretched his arm and rested it on Yun Qing's shoulder, leaning on her to walk forward. Yun Qing doesn't like to have physical contact with Qi Yan, but Qi Sueha is here and she can't push him away directly. Therefore, she walked awkwardly and her body appeared slightly stiff. Qi Yan glanced at her reluctant expression and teasingly asked, "So resistant to your husband, do you think you have a mistress outside?" Yun suppressed his inner anger and said in a deep voice, "Qi Yan, don't think of everyone like you. Don't you have any points in your heart about the reason why I hate you?" He had a clear conscience and said, "No count." Yun Qing glared at him and said, "You're really shameless. If your PC is caught, you can still be so righteous." Qi Yan touched his nose and casually said, "I was careless this time. I'll be more careful next time." Yun Qing wished he could not kick him into a small ditch. Yun Qing thought this was the biggest irony he suffered today. But when they stood at the entrance of Qi Yan's residence, they saw several pieces of paper pasted on the door. She really felt a bit overwhelmed and jumped out of the face of divorce. "Qi Yan, I'm pregnant." "Qi Yan, you turtle bastard, get out of here for me." "Qi Yan, if you think you're hiding, I won't be able to find you. I'll tell you, I'll go find your wife and Qi Sueha." Yun Qing only felt that the sky and earth were spinning, even though she had no feelings for Qi Yan. But after suffering such setbacks one after another, even if I remain calm, my mood cannot be better. Qi Yan frowned deeply as he looked at the words above, and lowered his gaze to see Yun Qing's imminent outburst of emotions. He reached out and pulled off the paper, then put it into his pants pocket. "Qi Sueha just answered the phone in the car, this will be over." She came over and saw the two of them standing at the door and not entering the room. She asked, "Why not enter?" She pushed open the courtyard door and walked forward first with her foot raised. Qi Yan reached out and wanted to shoulder Yun Qing again. Yun Qing took a big step back and shook him off, his dry eyes roaring with humiliation and anger. "For over 2 years, everything has surged in my heart and erupted at this point." She restrained her excitement and said calmly, "Qi Yan, I want a divorce." "What are you saying?" Qi Sueha retreated and glared at her angrily. "I want a divorce," Yun Qing repeated. "Impossible," Qi Sueha immediately retorted, then added, "At least not now." The fact that Qi Yan was arrested for soliciting prostitution was something she had finally managed to suppress. If the two divorce at this time, it is undoubtedly indirectly proving the rumors of Qi Yan's prostitution. This will affect Qi's stock price and the board's confidence in her as the chairman. Yun Qingmu's eyes were firm and his tone was resolute. He repeated for the 3rd time, "Qi Dong, I must divorce." Qi Sueha walked forward, his sharp gaze intimidating. Yun Qing worked hard to keep himself calm and forced himself to remain calm. She repeatedly told herself in her heart that Qi Sueha was not a devil who killed without blinking an eye, but just a woman. In order to show her determination, she met Qi Sueha's domineering eyebrows and paused word by word, "I want a divorce, I must get one." This statement is undoubtedly a provocation to Qi Sueha's dignity. She raised her hand towards Yun Qing, wanting to slap him. But it was grabbed by Qi Yan in time. She turned her head and looked at her son in surprise and confusion. Qi Yan slowly moved his steps to Yun Qing's side and said in a low voice, "This is something between me and Qing Qing. Please let us solve it ourselves." Qi Sueha explained, "Ah Yan, you can't divorce at this time, you know." Qi Yan turned his head to look at Yun Qing's pale face and said indifferently, "I will handle it myself." Qi Sueha didn't want or dare to get angry with Qi Yan, so he charged Yun Qing and said angrily, "Yun Qing, let me tell you, your family took 100 million from me. With only this 100 million, you don't have the right to divorce. Unless our Qi family doesn't want you." Yun Qing stepped forward, completely devoid of fear, and coldly said, "Qi Dong, this one." Qi Sueha mercilessly interrupted, words insulting. "Yun Qing, if it weren't for me in the past 2 years, you would have been spoiled by those old men long ago. You said this 100 million, do you want to pay it back? What do you want to pay back?" Do you want to sell it? That's enough. Qi Yan's face turned pale as he ordered Sueha to leave. If you don't have anything to do, just leave first. Qi Sueha plucked out Yun Qing and finally warned, you'd better dispel my thoughts of divorce and don't give me any ulterior motives. Qi Yan angrily rebuked, I've said enough. Qi Sueha's eyes flickered slightly, as if he had been injured by his son. But she had been on the battlefield for a long time, cleverly covering it up, and with her gaze out of the clouds, she lightly got into the car. As the car slowly drove out of their sight, Yun Qing walked aside, distancing the two and saying, don't think you just said a few words for me, and I won't divorce. Qi Yan struggled to stand due to leg pain. He leaned aside and leaned against the wall in the garden, whispering softly, can we go first? My leg hurts a lot. Yun Qing lowered his head and looked at it without being moved. You can go in by yourself. I'm leaving, he said. She turned around and walked away. Qi Yan stood up and reached out to embrace her shoulder, firmly embracing her as she walked inside. I apologize on behalf of my mother, he said. There's no need, Yun said in a harsh tone. The two of them entered the room, and Yun Qing helped him sit down on the sofa before leaving. Qi Yan reached out and blocked her way, lying on the sofa with her upper body up, looking up with a faint smile, send the Buddha to the west. You see, my whole body is dirty. Help me put down the shower water, and also go to the pharmacy to buy some anti-inflammatory and hemostatic drugs for me. Yun Qingling snorted angrily and said, Qi Yan, if you need a servant, let Qi Dong buy one for you. Why spend 100 million on me and still hold the title of Mrs. Qi? Qi Yan lifted his injured leg and knocked it against the coffee table, saying calmly, Miss, I really didn't mean to. I really have leg pain and it's not convenient for me. He pulled up the hem of his pants, revealing his calves that were simply wrapped with torn cloth strips. The blood had already dyed the white cloth strips bright red, scorching and glaring. Yun Qing didn't expect him to be so badly injured on the way back. Qi Yan leaned on the sofa without speaking, and now it seems that it is mostly due to excessive blood loss and weak body. For the sake of his help just now, Yun Qing went to the bathroom to put in the shower water first, and then went to the pharmacy outside to buy the medicine and bandages he needed. When she comes back, Qi Yan hasn't come out of the bathroom yet. She went over and knocked on the door, saying, I've bought the things and put them on the coffee table in the living room. Qi Yan's voice came from inside. Bring it in. Yun Qing hesitated for a few seconds before going downstairs to the living room to pick up the medicine. He turned his back and put it through the crack in the door. I left it on the ground, he said. Qi Yan's voice weakly emphasized, I asked you to come in and help me apply medicine. Yun Qing recognized that his voice was not right, but he didn't want to rashly enter. You're taking a shower, how can I apply medicine to you? Qi Yan said, I'm wrapped around a towel. Yun Qing stood at the door hesitating for a while, his figure swaying back and forth on the white glass door. Qi Yan waited impatiently, his voice muffled, what are you fussing about outside? Yun Qing then gently pushed open the door and saw Qi Yan lying in the bathtub, with a towel wrapped around her lower body, through the crack in the door. With his head resting on the countertop, his forehead was sweating profusely under the goose-yellow light, and his lips were dry and cracked. Qi Yan slowly opened his eyes, lifted his legs and rested them on the edge of the bathtub. Hurry up, he said. She walked in and saw that the bath water had been dyed a light red by his blood. Yun Qing dared not look up at him. He crouched down on the damp ground with his head down, and began cleaning Qi Yan's wounds, disinfecting, anti-inflammatory, and hemostatic. Qi Yan looked at her from beginning to end, with a seemingly absent guard, wary that she would take the opportunity to use the scissors in her hand to pierce into his heart. Her serious and quiet demeanor seemed like a soft light supporting his cholera-stricken nerves, bringing unexpected comfort and joy. Quiet and serene eyes, with a serene and elegant temperament, like the peach blossom paradise in a chaotic world, giving people a peaceful and leisurely time. Cloud Light cuts medical tape. At this moment, the phone in her pocket rang and she reached out to connect. Wang Xinfeng's lively voice came. Gently, Mr. Yu called to ask you to go to the Baiyue Club tonight to sign the contract. She didn't want to go, but glanced at Qi Yan and agreed. Wang Xian said happily, remember not to be late at 8 p.m. Yun Qing said, okay. No need to ask, Yun Qing knows why Yu Jiming made an offer at the Baiyue Club. Alright. She put away her phone and got up with everything. Qi Yan raised his body and glanced at him curiously, asking, are you leaving? Where are we going? It's none of your business, she said before she could calm down. Qi Yan reached out and pulled, causing Yun Qing to fall into the bathtub. Her white shirt was soaked, reflecting her beautiful chest line. She instinctively reached out to cover it, causing her body to lose support and fall directly in front of his moist and sturdy chest. She propped her hand on the side and looked up to see his smooth and handsome lower jawline rippling with water. Her handsome eyebrows seemed to be reflected in the ripples, showing a hazy and sharp beauty. Qi Yan's voice was hoarse, as if a wisp of high temperature was burning on her skin. What contract needs to be signed at the club? Qi Yan, this is none of your business. If you don't divorce, from now on, you can play with me as well, Yun said in a sharp voice. Qi Yan said happily, you have quite a temper. She held her body high, wanting to get up. Qi Yan's broad palm clasped the back of her head, firmly imprisoning her. His obscene pupils, scorching morning light, and a lazy tone with irresistible intimidation, girl, I need you now. So, I won't let you go for now. Yun Qing sneered, do you want me? What do you need me to do? Qi Yan gently rubbed his fingertips on the back of her head, pondering for a moment, and said in a cynical tone, you see, I'm still injured and need someone to take care of me. Qi Yan, I really want to strangle you. Yun Qing gritted his teeth and propped his hands on both sides of the bathtub, getting up angrily. Qi Yan joked, murder your husband for the sake of a wild man. You're playing a bit too hard here. Yun lightly glanced out at him. Turning around and walking to the door, I heard him say calmly, if a wild man bullies you at night, you can give me a call. No need. She slammed the door tightly and left angrily. At 8 p.m., the private room of Baiyue Club. Yun Qing, who suddenly started not participating in social events 2 years ago, will sit next to the general manager of Shangrong Group. She rested one hand on Jiming's shoulder, crossed her legs, and gently swayed. Holding half a glass of wine in his hand, his clear and transparent apricot eyes were soaking in a drunken state, showing a desire to welcome and refuse. She lightly slammed the glass in Yu Jiming's hand and coquettishly said, Mr. Yu, I have had such a great time drinking with you. How could this contract also be signed? Yu Jiming's hand caressed her slender waist restlessly, revealing his inner desire in his shrewd eyes. He leaned closer and said, sign. Sign. Yun Qing smiled and looked up, then dried the wine in the cup. Yu Jiming watched as she finished drinking the wine and then picked up the bottle to give it to her. Yun Qing reached out and covered the mouth of the cup, taking out the contract behind him and patting it on the table before he was still conscious. Mr. Yu, you see I've drunk so much. Yu Jiming smiled and took the contract aside, then brushed away her hand that was pressing against the rim of the cup, licking and saying, it's not urgent. It's not urgent. Let's have a good drink first. Yun Qing refused to comply and picked up the cup, with his arms resting on Jiming's shoulders. His beautiful and delicate features were soaked in alcohol, exuding a unique charm. With anger towards Qi Yan and Qi Sueha, she circled with a smile and her voice softened a lot. Mr. Yu, you lied to me. You lied to me to accompany you after drinking, but you still wanted to lie to me to sleep with you. Yu Jiming sneered and said, Yun Qing, I didn't lie to you. Don't worry, I will definitely sign this letter tonight. Yun Qing raised his eyebrows and said, really? Yu Jiming hugged her soft waist, his inner restlessness becoming increasingly apparent. How could I be willing to lie to you, little darling? She withdrew her hand and slammed her glass towards the table, confidently saying, "Okay. I'll drink." Yu Jiming poured her a full cup again and personally served it to her, looking at her with sly eyes. Yun glanced at him lightly and confirmed, "I drank it, will you sign it?" "Sign." Yu Jiming couldn't wait to deliver the wine to Yun Qing's mouth and feed her to drink. He rushed the delivery, causing Yun Qing to choke. She pushed with both hands, but Yu Jiming didn't stop and kept pouring into her mouth. Yun Qing's face was uncomfortable, and nausea surged up from within. The highly potent foreign wine quickly flowed down his throat. Her chest felt like a volcano about to erupt, burning fiercely. Yun Qing couldn't swallow it, and a small amount of alcohol flowed out from the corner of her mouth, as if a transparent and plump jelly was sticking to her lips. Yu Jiming couldn't bear it anymore, withdrew his glass, lowered his head, and wanted to kiss it. New article, welcome to Collect in the Pit. Starting today, we will update you. Please cast more recommended votes to support us. Thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Do you want me to take her for an abortion? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Do you want me to take her for an abortion? Bang. The door was kicked open by someone. Yu Jiming turned around and saw Qi Yan walking slowly in the dim light and shadow, as if he were a hellish wheel. He said displeased, "Qi Yan, who let you in? Get out of here, get out of here." Qi Yan remained unmoved and sat down beside him, only looking at Yun Qing who was drunk. He said leisurely, "Mr. Yu, do you dare to touch Qi Yan's woman?" Yu Jiming looked at him and then at Yun Qing, "Your woman." Yun lightly grabbed onto Jiming's shoulder and ignored Qi Yan's presence. "Mr. Yu, I have nothing to do with him. Let's continue drinking," he said. Yu Jiming stared blankly at Qi Yan, distinguishing their words. Yun Qingchuan pretended that Qi Yan did not exist, and caught too much of Jiming's teasing to make him drink. He coquettishly said, "Mr. Yu, are you still drinking or not? This contract has not been signed yet." Yu Jiming gave her a slight smile and said, "Drink. But let me have a few words with Qi Shao first." Yun Qing made up his mind to embarrass Qi Yan and twisted him to drink. "Don't worry about him. I'm not his woman." He held Yun Qing in his arms and looked at Qi Yan provocatively. "Qi Shao, this is what Yun Qing said himself." Qi Yan hooked his lips and laughed wildly, quickly picking up the wine bottle from the table and smashing it at Yu Jiming's head. If he's not mistaken, Yu Jiming was planning to kiss her when he just came in. Qi Yan's woman, how can these dog men dye their fingers? Yun Qing was completely stunned. When did Qi Yan have such fierce courage? Yu Jiming was stunned for a while, then regained his senses and shouted angrily, "Qi Yan, I'll damn you." He picked up the wine bottle and was about to smash it at Qi Yan, but Qi Yan quickly caught him and lifted him with his long legs, easily knocking him down. Before he even got up, he lifted his foot and stepped on his head, forcefully suppressing him to the ground. His sinister eyebrows awkwardly swept the wine bottles swaying on the table, and his deep and mellow voice released a threatening and murderous aura. He asked Yun Qing, "How much did he let you drink?" Alcohol completely ferments in Yun Qing's body, stirring up her consciousness. She weakly leaned over the sofa, grabbed Qi Yan's arm, and spoke for Yu Jiming, "What are you doing?" "Wine, it's something I want to drink myself." This statement is undoubtedly stirring up fire. Qi Yan increased the force on his feet and stepped on it more heavily. Yu Jiming struggled to raise his hand with the intention of gripping Qi Yan's ankle, but the pain made it difficult for him to grip it. "Qi Yan, let go of me. Your grandson, even your mother Qi Sueha has to give me a third of thin noodles." Qi Yan lifted his foot and kicked it angrily. Yu Jiming pulled half a circle in place, and blood flowed out of his nose. He propped his hands on the ground, struggling to get up. Qi Yan calmly supported Yun Qing and lay down on the sofa. Then he came over and picked up Yu Jiming from the ground, dragging him to the table. Then, he grabbed his hair, pulled his head back, picked up the wine on the table, and poured it at him fiercely. Yun Qing wanted to go over and stop him, but he was too drunk and tried to get up several times before falling back on the sofa. She waved her hand limply and called out to her softly, "Qi Yan." "Qi." Qi Yan turned a deaf ear and immersed himself in drinking Yu Jiming wine. "Half bottle, 1 bottle, it's half a bottle again, half a cup, another whole bottle." Cough and cough. Yu Jiming coughed continuously and couldn't speak. He raised his hands above his head, begging him to let go of his intentions. Qi Yan threw away the wine bottle in his hand, like throwing a dead dog at Yu Jiming on the ground. He took out a cigarette from his pocket and lazily sat down at the table. His strong and handsome features flickered in the orange-red flames, and his deep eyes were heavy and sharp. He lifted his foot and lightly kicked Yu Jiming, who had died of drunkenness, and turned to look at Yun Qing on the sofa. A bundle of tube lights on the roof enveloped her delicate face, like the late-night blooming epiphyllum, giving a stunning beauty of withered trees in full bloom. He rubbed his eyebrows, feeling distressed. What should he do? After Yun Qing left, she called Qi Sueha and learned that their relationship was very bad, and both sides were very disgusted with each other. She told him that whether or not to keep this relationship depends entirely on himself. If you are determined to divorce, it will also take some time. Qi Yan stared at the 2 camel-red lumps on Yun Qing's cheeks, as if wine was soaking in the light, crystal clear. He felt a long-lost silhouette in his heart, biting on the inexplicable emotion of sleeping for a long time but ready to wake up at any moment. Qi Yan silently finished smoking a cigarette and vigorously extinguished it in the ashtray. He walked over and passed his arms through her knee and neck, picking up Yun Qing and planning to leave. Yun Qing suddenly woke up and pointed vaguely at the sofa, murmuring softly, "Okay, contract." When Yun Qing woke up, her legs were bent and lying horizontally on the bed, basically occupying the entire bed. Qi Yan slept sideways on the edge of the bed, tightly held by her, with his face pressed against his warm chest. Yun Qing looked up, seeing Qi Yan's deep eyebrows lightly closed, sleeping in the morning light. She suddenly woke up and pushed Qi Yan out of bed. She also retreated to the other corner, tidying up her messy hair, and asked coldly, "How could you be in my bed?" Qi Yan stood up, propped up by the edge of the bed in distress, with one hand inserted into his waist, rubbing his sleepy eyes, and a playful smile curved around his lips. "Miss, this is my room," he said. Yun Qing looked around the room and saw clearly that it was indeed Qi Yan's room. When the two got married, Qi Sueha bought this place as their wedding house, but Yun Qing had never lived in the future because Qi Yan didn't like it and didn't allow it. She lightly shook her dizzy head and vaguely remembered what happened last night. With an awkward expression on her face, she asked in confusion, "Why were you there last night?" Qi Yan joked, "Your question is a bit unnecessary." Clouds remained silent. 365 days a year, at least 200 days of Qi Yan's nights are spent there. However, she was a bit clueless and said, "Who let you in last night?" "If you hadn't come, Yu Jiming would have signed this contract last night." According to Qi Yan's hatred towards her temperament, not falling into the well like last night was already his greatest kindness. Surprisingly, he even saved her. This is not like Qi Yan's style. Qi Yan looked at her as if he was looking at someone with a brain problem, perhaps because he had not yet woken up from drinking. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is it difficult for me to watch my wife fall asleep?" Yun Qing. She brushed her forehead with her fingertips as she got out of bed. In an instant, she lowered her head and saw the men's pajamas she was wearing. Looking back, she saw Qi Yan wearing them all, and her breath quickly receded to her chest. Qi Yan seemed to see through her thoughts and said lightly, "Don't worry, I'm not interested in drunkards." Yun Qing stood by the bed and looked at Qi Yan across the bed, "So who changed my clothes?" Qi Yan said calmly, "I changed it." Yun Qing was once again mocked. He walked towards the door with a lazy tone and said, "I just helped you change clothes." If it falls into the hands of an old man, you might end up jumping off a building and committing suicide. After a brief interval, Yun walked slowly out of the room and nervously thanked him again. Qi Yan poured 2 cups of water from the bar, handed her a cup, and said, "You vomited everywhere in my car last night, and you have to pay for the car wash." She asked angrily, "Do you want me to pay for this car wash fee?" "Sorry," he said again, "your dirty clothes are in the bamboo bag in the laundry room. Remember to take them with you when you leave later." Yun glanced at him lightly and said, "I know." Besides, Qi Yan bent down and picked up the contract from the coffee table. He looked at it and flipped to the page where he had signed it. His sharp eyes lingered on the letter U. With a faint smile in his eyes, he looked at her and said, "If I say I can help you get this endorsement, what will you give me in return?" Yun Qing was once again shocked. How could Qi Yan still help her? At first, she was forced by Lin Ruiting to marry Qi Yan, and indeed thought about using the power of the Qi family to climb up. Qi Sueha also knew her thoughts and provided some help. But Qi Yan has always been a prank, mocking her as a parasite that relies on the Qi family. Whether at home or outside, he never gives her any face and often plays with her self-esteem, providing entertainment and ridicule for him and his popular confidants. Yun Qing stared blankly at Qi Yan, his stunned expression falling into his deep and distant pupils. Qi Yan couldn't help but laugh and knocked the contract in his hand on her forehead. "I heard you've been fighting for this endorsement for a long time." Yun Qing regained his composure and went to retrieve the contract. Qi Yan raised his hand to avoid her, then sat down on the sofa, flipped through the contract terms inside, and the reward was quite generous. He closed it up, placed it on his knee, looked at her, and said directly, "I'll help you get the endorsement, you can help me do something." Yun Qing took a sip of water, suppressed his inner panic, and asked, "What's going on?" She knew that Qi Yan would not be so good for no reason. Qi Yan handed her an inspection report and said, "Help me solve this problem." Yun Qing picked it up and unfolded it. Pregnancy test report. Name: Li Yun. Examination result: 4 weeks of early pregnancy. This was also delivered by Li Yun last night. He doesn't like to dwell on such matters and has no experience, so he wants to hand them over to Yun Qing. Yun Qing pinched the report form, his still lingering anger surged up again, and he stared at him incredulously. "Do you want me to take her for an abortion?" End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Meiren's Smile and Hasty Life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Meiren's Smile and Hasty Life. Qi Yan sat sideways with his knees crossed, his long arms resting on the backrest of the sofa, leisurely and casual, smiling and teasing, and said, "If you're willing to take care of her, I don't mind giving birth to her." "Qi Yan, you're just a jerk." Yun lightly angrily threw the report sheet in his face. Qi Yan picked it up and flicked his finger on the thin paper. His slightly joyful eyebrows seemed to be admiring his own masterpiece that was about to be cruelly destroyed. "After all, this is also a life. It's a pity to destroy it," he said. Yun Qing simply didn't want to stay with him for another second and turned around to leave. Qi Yan said lightly behind him, "Yun Qing, why don't I ask my mom? You know, my mom has always wanted me to have a child." He paused for a moment and then said, "I just don't know. Once this child is born, can you, Mrs. Qi, still hold on to your position? You know, my mother still has some concerns about your delayed pregnancy." Yun Qing turned back and said angrily, "Can I have a child alone?" Qi Yan sneered, "So, you're quite willing to give birth to a child for me?" She retorted sternly, "I didn't mean that." Qi Yan approached her and looked up at her, his gentle eyebrows showing his playful and teasing demeanor. "I didn't do anything to you last night, were you very disappointed?" Pop. A loud slap fell, and a sense of timidity arose from Yun Qing's heart. She saw a cluster of flames igniting in Qi Yan's eyes. Suddenly, it burned into a raging fire. In the next second, he grabbed her neck and pressed her onto the sofa. His eyes were fierce, like dark clouds rushing towards her. Yun Qing, what kind of kindness do you pretend to be for me? What sympathy do you show? In fact, you hope this child is beaten up more than I do in your heart. Yun Qing raised his hand to restrain the force between his hands and fiercely protested, what if we all have you as a family? For the sake of endorsement, I am still being teased like a monkey by people. Qi Yan's eyes flashed with a moment of astonishment, and what persisted for a long time was still anger and disgust that went against his original intention. You really think that our Qi family is your wishing pool, and you can give you whatever you want? Yun Qing, you have also been in society for so many years, and you have to pay a price for anything you want. Yun Qing chuckled bitterly twice, pushed his hand away a bit, and his breathing was no longer so uncomfortable. Qi Yan, we've been married for more than 2 years, isn't it enough for you to tease me? Now you even need me to help you deal with other women's children in their stomachs. Mrs. Qi, this kind of thing, Qi Yan sneered and sneered, gritting his teeth, you are the most suitable. Yun Qing thrust at him like an arrow, feeling no pain, only anger and nausea, as if the digested alcohol had been poured back into his body. Qi Yan gradually calmed down in her silence, loosened her neck, sat up, and threw the report sheet onto her body. He glanced over, avoiding Yun Qing's angry gaze, and said calmly, as long as you can make her kill this child, I will give you Shang Rong's endorsement contract. Qi Yan made other women pregnant, and Yun Qing knew this was not the first time. But let her handle it, this is the first time. Yun Qing came out of the first-rank imperial mansion, first delivering the clothes from last night to the laundry, and then returning home to change into clothes. Under impulse, she originally wanted to drive to find Qi Sueha. But the time from the first-rank imperial mansion to the Blue Valley was enough to calm her down. Qi Sueha doted on Qi Yan and often chose to indulge his behavior. However, she still tried to call Qi Sueha. Perhaps hoping to have a release from the relationship with Qi Yan through this opportunity. However, Qi Sueha only said, gently, since you have entrusted this matter to Yan, let's do it according to his instructions. She took it for granted and reminded lightly, Mom, this time it's different. This is a life, it's your grandson. Qi Sueha didn't agree, so what? Yan doesn't like it. Yun Qing hung up the phone in despair and took out the contact information that Qi Yan had written to her, Li Yun. After thinking about it, she contacted the other person. Jinhua community is a typical old community in He City, with almost no safety guarantee. She parked her car on the street, wearing brown sunglasses that almost covered half of her face. When Yun Qing walked to the entrance of the community, the security guard didn't even look up and opened the door for her. Yun Qing found Unit 701 at the address, and shortly after knocking on the door, it opened from inside. She looked at the woman with a more gorgeous appearance and asked, Li Yun. It is the type that Qi Yan likes, full and charming. Li Yun raised her eyebrows and eyes, with a hint of disdain in her gaze. Qi Yan asked you to come. Yun Qing has a cold and indifferent personality, and is even more unwilling to talk to strangers. And the woman in front of her is still pregnant with her husband and children. Although she is heartless and devoid of love with Qi Yan, it is somewhat uncomfortable to repeatedly encounter such betrayals. She pushed away Li Yun, lifted her feet, and entered the room, staring down at her abdomen for a few seconds. Then, she took out 50,000 yuan in cash from her bag and said directly, Qi Yan doesn't want this child. Let me tell you to go to the hospital and get rid of it. Li Yun glanced at the cash on the table, sat down on the dining stool, crossed her legs, picked up her nails and poked them consciously or unconsciously. She calmly said, I can also have the child knocked out. But. She placed her hand on the cash and lightly picked, add 3 zeros after this number. Miss Li, this is absolutely impossible. Yun Qing sneered. Li Yun picked up 10,000 yuan and weighed it in her hand, gently caressing her abdomen with the other hand, determined to get it. Mrs. Qi, if your Qi family doesn't want it, then I'll have to post this online. You Qi family will be in a hurry, she said. Yun Qing was not surprised that she could see her identity. She is often forced by Qi Yan to deal with these dirty things, which is no longer a secret. However, some people have seen her, while others have not. Yun Qing reminded, Miss Li, if this matter were to escalate, it would not only embarrass the entire family. Li Yun smiled and said, what are you afraid of losing face? If I could get this 50 million, I wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing in my life. However, when the time comes, all I'll lose is people, but Qi Yan will be miserable. Yun Qing asked, what does it mean? Li Yun said, Mrs. Qi, that night I was forced by Qi Yan. More precisely, I was drugged by Qi Yan. Yun Qing was not intimidated by a few words and calmly asked, where is the evidence? Li Yun. The people at the Baiyue Club saw that I was taken away by Qi Yan that night. Yun Qing said, what can this prove? Qi Yan has taken many women there. Li Yun smiled and said, anyway, since there isn't 50 million, I won't agree to have an abortion. I'll give birth to this child, and you don't worry about me threatening your wife Qi's position. Yun Qing remained calm and said, it's okay, you can take care of it. When time comes, we'll go do a paternity test first. If it's really Qi Yan's seed, you'll be born. Li Yun's smile froze on her face, but she quickly regained her composure and showed a hint of unease. Okay, no problem. I hope you can obediently give way then, she said, no problem. Yun Qing bent down and propped her hands on both sides, whispering in her ear, Miss Li, be careful when going out these days. Li Yunqiang smiled and glared at her unwillingly. Yun Qing came out of Li Yun's house and called Qi Yan, stating that he needed 50 million yuan to agree to take away the child. Qi Yan didn't say anything and sneered at her in an indifferent tone, Yun Qing, is that all you have? Yun Qing. Leaving Li Yun's home, Yun Qing went to the studio to complete the shooting of the magazine cover. During this time, I received a phone call from my agent Huan Feiyan, asking her what happened last night. She said angrily, Yun Qing, I asked you to go find Yu Jiming to sign a contract. Why did you even throw someone into the hospital? Yun Qing explained, he made things difficult for me first. How did Mr. Yu make things difficult for you? Besides, even if he made things difficult for you, just endure and sign the contract first. Miss Wang. Huan Feiyan ordered displeasedly, all right. It's no use saying these things now. You should go to the hospital immediately. Mr. Yu said, if you don't apologize in person, you won't think about this endorsement anymore. Miss Wang. Doodle doodle. Yun Qing reluctantly handed his phone to his assistant Lin Bei next to him, quickly adjusting his mindset and dedicating himself to the filming work. 2 hours have passed, and Yun Qing has finished filming and changing his outfit. On the way back to the company with Lin Bei, she thought it over and sent a message to Qi Yan. Are you doing anything tonight? A few minutes later, Qi Yan asked, I'm available. Yun Qing. I'm going to the hospital to visit Yu Jiming. Can you come with me? Yun Qing thought Qi Yan would make a decisive decision, but he didn't expect him to be quite straightforward and said, okay. The two of them were scheduled to meet at the entrance of the hospital. When Yun Qing arrived, Qi Yan had already arrived. He was wearing a red and white baseball uniform, with a black pair of sports pants underneath. His hair was scattered by the gentle breeze on his forehead. He placed one arm around his chest, leaning against the hood of the car to smoke, exuding a bookish and carefree aura etched in his bones. It was as if a graceful cloud swept over her cheeks, leaving a gentle touch as she continued to wander in the wind, witnessing the vastness of the great rivers and understanding the preciousness of human smoke and fire. Beneath his extensive knowledge, he exuded a calm and atmospheric demeanor amidst the ups and downs of life. This is not at all like Qi Yan whom she knows. Qi Yan's temperament is promiscuous, and despicable. Qi Yan saw her park the car, stepped over, gentlemanly opened the car door for her, glanced at the flowers and fruit baskets in the back seat, and said, "What a waste." "Yun Qing. What did you say?" Qi Yan took 2 steps back, bent down, and pulled out the fruit basket and bouquet from inside. "If I had known you were here to please him today, I wouldn't have wasted that energy last night," he said. Yun Qing said, "If I don't come to please him, how can I get the contract back?" Qi Yan tilted his head to look at her and mocked, "So you're asking me to apologize?" Yun Qing said naturally, "Qi Yan, of course you have to handle what you have caused yourself." His stern eyebrows locked tightly against her and he jokingly said, "Yun Qing, was it quite disappointing that he couldn't have sex with Yu Jiming last night?" "Yes, if you don't come, I might still be in bed with Yu Jiming," Yun Qing said with a mixture of anger. Qi Yan sneered and turned his head to see the old man standing at the door selling fruits. He looked down at the fruit basket in his hand, turned around, and placed the basket and flowers next to the master. "Grandpa, these are for you," he said in a gentle voice. Then, without waiting for the master to speak, he grabbed Yun Qing's arm and left. Yun Qing was in great pain from being pulled by him, and he looked back frequently, reminding him, "I bought these to visit Yu Jiming." He asked disapprovingly, "Why, do you really like him? Buy him flowers." "Yes, I like it." "Miss, are you blind or blind? A scumbag like Yu Jiming is only suitable for burning ashes to feed flowers." Yun Qing was shocked by the fierce determination in his words. But his tone was light and cheerful, as if he was just telling a joke that everyone would tell. But the malice in his eyes was genuine. Yun Qing unconsciously took 2 steps away from him. However, the next second Qi Yan reached out and grabbed her into his arms. Yun Qing hesitated for a moment, and Qi Yan grabbed her shoulder tightly, saying, "Everyone said you're my woman. Since I'm here with you, I need to do enough acting." Yun Qing defended, "I didn't ask you to accompany me in acting. I just asked you." Qi Yan took the conversation and sneered, "Do you want me to be your bodyguard?" "Yun Qing, you can't afford me." "I didn't mean that either." "Miss, what do you mean by that? Is it true that you want me to take Yu Jiming's life in the hospital?" As the words fell, people inside the elevator looked at the 2 of them one after another. Yun glanced at him lightly and lazily. Qi Yan remained indifferent and continued, "Even if you want him to die, let's keep a low profile. Be good, when he's discharged, I'll make him disappear." Is this a smile for Bomai, willing to sacrifice her life? Fear appeared in everyone's eyes as they slowly distanced themselves from each other. Yun Qing quickly raised his hand to cover Qi Yan's mouth. At this moment, the elevator door happened to open, and she ran out like pulling Qi Yan to escape. Qi Yan followed slowly behind her, not caring at all about what others thought. He wanted to shake off her hand. Yun Qing pulled him harder and ran forward, urging him, "Hurry up. He has a broad and slender figure, and his weight is not light due to years of exercise." Therefore, it was a bit difficult for Yun Qing to pull, coupled with his lack of cooperation. At the staircase, Yun Qing realized that no one was looking at them anymore, so he let go of his hand and looked up at the stairs. "There are only 3 or 4 floors left, let's climb up," he said. Qi Yan didn't speak, he lifted his legs and strode up, without even thinking about waiting for Yun Qing. When she climbed up the 7th floor, Qi Yan was standing by the window smoking. Waves of sunshine streamed in and spread over him, shining like a sky. He pointed to Yu Jiming's ward entrance and said, "You go first." Yun Qing looked at the 2.3 cigarette left in his hand, with a hint of unease in his eyes. But she was stubborn and didn't say anything. Qi Yan saw through, but didn't speak, turned around and looked out the window. Yun Qing walked to the entrance of the ward and saw Yu Jiming holding the nurse's delicate and fair hand with gauze on his nose bridge, looking good. The nurse saw someone coming in and quickly pushed them away. Yu Jiming raised his eyebrows and looked at Yun Qing, no longer hiding and pinching him. He said straightforwardly, "Yun Qing, are you coming empty-handed? Are you planning to make up for me with your own life?" Yun Qing suppressed his inner disgust and walked over, hesitating. He stood on the bed and said against his heart, "Mr. Yu, what happened last night was my fault. I apologize to you. It's your luck that I didn't beat you to death or disability last night." Qi Yan's voice echoed behind him, and Yun Qing was pulled behind him. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Wants me to marry you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Wants me to marry you. Who let you in? You go out, go out. Excitedly, Yu Jiming picked up the cup from the nearby cabinet and threw it at Qi Yan. Qi Yan protected Yun Qingbiao and dodged, causing the cup to crash against the wall and shatter. Yu Jiming saw that he hadn't hit, so he grabbed something else and smashed it, shouting, "Qi Yan, you're just a bastard who relies on Qi Sueha to bully you. Last night, that was my negligence. When I'm better, let me see how I'll deal with you. Pack me up. Even if you kneel on the ground and call me Grandpa, I won't let you go." Qi Yan sneered, "Calling you Grandpa is quite a beautiful idea." Following, he pushed Yun Qing out of the ward, closed the door, and pulled a chair against the door. Yu Jiming watched his movements and recoiled. "Qi Yan, what do you want to do?" Qi Yan walked over without saying a word of nonsense, pulled him off the bed, pushed him behind the door, and beat him hard, punching him to the bone. Midway through, I felt that Yu Jiming was shouting too loudly, so I dragged him to the restroom and stuffed a cloth into his mouth. Yun Qing was worried that Qi Yan would really cause trouble, so he kept pounding the door and telling him to stop. The doctor and nurse rushed over with questioning, but they couldn't push open the door and called for security. At this moment, Qi Yan opened the door from inside and came out, feeling calm and gentle. The doctor and nurse quickly pushed him away and rushed in anxiously to help Yu Jiming, who had a blue nose and swollen face, up from the ground. Yu Jiming's swollen eyes strayed at the door and angrily pointed at Qi Yan, saying, "I want to sue you, I must sue you." Watching Yu Jiming's miserable situation, Yun Qing also felt relieved in his heart. However, if Yu Jiming really charges Qi Yan with intentional injury, it will really anger Qi Sueha, and because Qi Yan is standing up for her. She tried to squeeze into the ward from Qi Yan's side, trying to apologize to someone. Qi Yan saw through her thoughts and reached out to stop her at the door, provoking, "Okay. I'll wait." Yun Qing was forcibly dragged out of the ward by Qi Yan. When she arrived at the lobby on the first floor, she angrily shook off his hand and couldn't help but shout, "Why did you hit him again? Do you know that if he really sues you, you will go to jail?" Qi Yan looked quietly at the crowd of people hanging up for diagnosis and medicine at the window ahead, indifferent. She was very excited and said, "I know Yu Jiming is a jerk and a scoundrel. But we can find a gentler way to solve it." He asked indifferently, "What method?" Yun Qing fell silent, his eyes dim. Qi Yan broke through straightforwardly, his cold tone piercing her like a naked reality, "You have no choice. At least for now, you have no choice. Before you have the strength to confront capital, you can only endure his harassment and frivolity time and time again." Yun Qing's emotions were a bit shattered, and his voice revealed a sense of helplessness and panic. "But if you beat him up now, will the matter be resolved? Yu Jiming is going to sue you, sue you. How do you want me to explain to Qi Dong? She is not afraid of Yu Jiming, she is guilty of Qi Yan being implicated by herself and worried that Qi Sueha will anger her." Qi Yan's calm pupils stared at her for a few seconds, and without hesitation, he said with joy and anger, "I won't be okay. Moreover, Yu Jiming will never harass you again." Yun Qing looked up at him, wanting to glimpse all the meaning of these words from his vast and profound eyes. But he hid too deep, she couldn't see clearly or understand. The only thing that can be certain is that at this moment, Qi Yan showed no disdain for her using the Qi family to climb up. The contempt and disdain for her once were completely gone. "Qi Yan, it seems like he has undergone a complete transformation." She asked softly, "Why?" This made Qi Yan a bit confused and asked in reverse, "What?" Yun Qing brushed his hair behind him, pulled up his sleeves and walked to the parking lot. "Troops for the enemy, earth for floods. Forget it. I'd better take you to the lawyer first." Qi Yan laughed out loud, feeling genuinely happy. Yun Qing looked back at him and said in silence, "We're just going to consult first. If the trial really starts, it will definitely be Qi Dong's lawyer. I'll tell Qi Dong about this first, after all, it's because of me." He asked, "What about your endorsement?" Yun Qing sighed and said, "Let's talk more." At the parking lot, Qi Yan got into Yun Qing's car and said loudly, "You take me to the IFC National Finance Center." The Guojin Center is located in the CBD central area of He City, with Busheng and Qishir both located in this building, as well as the offices of some internationally renowned investment banks and law firms. Yun Qing ignited the car, released the brake, and slowly moved forward. "Are you not going with me to see a lawyer?" Qi Yan bluntly said, "Your lawyer's level is too poor." Yun Qing. On the morning of the third day, Shanrong Group issued two announcements to the public. One is to dismiss Yu Jiming from all his positions at Shanrong Group. The second announcement is that Yun Qing is the latest spokesperson for the group's products. Yun Qing read the announcement and was about to call Qi Yan when he received a message from him, "Next, it's up to you." She was puzzled that these two things were much easier than letting Li Yun take off the child. He is fully capable of doing it himself, why let her go? Yun Qing asked him, "What if Li Yunjian doesn't go to the hospital?" Qi Yan. "I only care about the outcome, the process is not important." Yun Qing understands that an accidental miscarriage is also acceptable. She secretly cursed a bastard in her heart. She sat in the coffee shop, and Wang Xian walked over with 2 cups of coffee smiling. As soon as she sat down, she asked, "I thought Shang Rong's endorsement was inappropriate, but I didn't expect Shang Rong to announce it directly." Yun Qing smiled and took the coffee, drinking it with his head down. She pushed Yun Qing's arm and said, "How did you handle Shang Rong's board of directors?" Yun Qing said truthfully, "I don't know any members of Shang Rong's board of directors." Wang Xian leaned over and smiled vaguely. "Then tell me, sister, which big shot did you secretly meet?" No. Wang Xian looked at her serene eyebrows and asked, "Really not?" Yun Qing leaned over and sat down, "There really isn't." Wang Xian muttered, "That's strange. How could Shangrong's board of directors dismiss Yu Jiming so straightforwardly?" Yun Qing looked bored outside and casually saw Li Yun wandering around. "Sister Wang, I left a bit early." She quickly grabbed the phone on the table and chased after me. Yun Qing chased out of the coffee shop and no longer saw Li Yun's figure. She searched up and down in the mall, and finally saw Li Yun and Xiang Huaiji in a Western restaurant on the 7th floor. She walked in and quietly chose the seat next to them to sit down. There is a brown glass partition between each table in the restaurant, be careful not to be noticed. She leaned against the wall in the corner, and when the waiter came to order, he only pointed to the picture on the menu and ordered a pasta and a glass of juice. The waiter quickly delivered the meal, and Yun Qing picked up a fork and casually ate it. The somewhat boring conversation between Li Yun and Xiang Huaiji made her feel a bit eager to get up and leave. From the conversation between the two, it seems that Li Yun has feelings for Xiang Huaiji, and there is a hint of persistent entanglement. Xiang Huaiji and Qi Yan have similar personalities and played well. Yun Qing even heard that the two had exchanged female partners before. If we were to talk about the difference between them, it would undoubtedly be more shrewd than Huaiji. Qi Yan is more like the foolish son of the landlord's family. Xiang Huaiji was annoyed by her and impatiently said, "Is there anything else?" "It's okay, I'm leaving." Li Yun reached out and just as he touched Xiang Huaiji's arm, he withdrew his hand and said, "Li Yun, our relationship has ended. I told you earlier that our relationship was only for fun." Xiang Huaiji sneered and said, now you're here to talk about love with me. I'm sorry, I really feel nauseous. Even if I like you, our Xiang family wouldn't let me be with a drinking companion. Li Yun cried and said, since you look down on me so much, why are you with me? Xiang Huaiji sneered and said, aren't you also interested in my money when you're with me? Are you interested in my identity as the third young master of the Xiang family? Li Yun's voice trembled as she defended, I admit it was because of this that I was with you at first. But now, I really like you. Xiang Huaiji placed his hands on the table, bent over and leaned over with a smile on his face. Do you like me? Li Yun nodded with tears in her eyes. He reached out and gently wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes, his tone more like teasing, do you want me to marry you? End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Child, Gone. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 6. Being teased, he stands out for her, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Being teased, he stands out for her, 1. Almost in an instant, Yun Qing felt a long string of numbers floating around in front of him. As a leader in the domestic beverage industry, if Wu can secure a 3-year endorsement contract, her revenue should be an astronomical number she has never seen before. Thinking about how happy it would be if she threw this pile of cash on the faces of her uncle's family. However, they would mock and ridicule everything she gained with phrases like being a slut, a prostitute slept by thousands of people. But if she agrees to the original book tonight, then her pride will really disappear. Yun Qing's smile didn't reach her heart, like frost wrapped around a tree branch in winter. Mr. Yuan, Mrs. Wu has been paralyzed for so many years and you have been taking good care of her. In everyone's eyes, your image has always been considerate and affectionate. If it were because of me, Mr. Yuan's image would be damaged and implicated in the Wu family, I would feel sorry. Miss Yun has exaggerated her influence a bit. Besides, even if it would affect the Wu family, I am still able to handle such a small fluctuation, said Yuan Shui's words. In a few words she choked on her smile and felt a bit embarrassed. Of course. This society has always been more tolerant of men than women. Miss Yun, I'm not interested in discussing sociological issues with you. But regarding the topic of food color, I think it would be more appropriate for Mr. Yuan to discuss it with others. Yuan Shui asked, Miss Yun, have you considered everything so quickly? Yun Qing's expression was resolute, and he directly led him in. Wu's 3-year advertising contract is indeed very attractive to me. But I'm sorry, I don't play with men with families. Yuan Shui laughed and extinguished his cigarette in the ashtray, turning his head to look at her. His deep and experienced eyes were like the hooks of a scorpion. She can't play with him. If she really agreed to him, in the event of an incident, he only needed a slight operation to fully recover, and she would definitely drown in the saliva of the public. At that time, her career will also be ruined. Traditionally, when there is something between a man and a woman, most people only condemn the woman. Yun Qing grabbed the chain bag hanging on the back of the chair, leaned over, and reached out to grab the phone on the table. Mr. Yuan, it's already late. I'll leave first, he said. Yuan Shui supported his forehead with both hands on the table and said, After a while, he asked again, do you need me to have someone take you back? Yun Qing, who walked to the door, turned around and said, thank you, Mr. Yuan. I have called a driver's representative. Miss Yun, I heard that the prayers at Lanrua Temple are very spiritual. I would like to ask Miss Yun to accompany me to pay my respects. If I make a wish that I can get Wu's 3-year advertising contract without spending one night with Mr. Yuan, does Mr. Yuan think I will get it? Yuan Shui smiled and shook her head, not commenting on her words. The wrinkles at the end of his eyes faintly revealed the fact that he was over 40 under the light, but he also used the money and time to stack up the dignified elegance to describe the profound charm of this age group. Yun Qing smiled and opened the door, then closed it again. At first glance, he saw Qi Yan standing in the corridor, his hands resting on the railing, overlooking the lobby below, looking a bit idle. She walked over and asked, "Aren't you having dinner with friends?" Qi Yan turned around and casually draped his arms back, saying, "They're smoking too stuffy inside the house. I'll come out and take a breath." "Don't you also smoke?" He immediately coughed up and explained, "I've been feeling unwell in my throat these past few days and I don't want to smell the smoke." Yun Qing remained silent. He asked again, "Have you finished eating?" Did you drink alcohol?" "Not much." Qi Yan reached out to her and said, "Car key." Yun Qing understood his meaning and said, "I called a driver's representative. He said, your appearance is not safe as a substitute driver. To be honest, if I want to escape the bill tonight, you can help me." Yun Qing took out the car key and gave it to him, half believing and half doubting. He seemed afraid that she would push it back, so he quickly picked it up and said, "Let's go." She stood in place watching him walk briskly downstairs, hesitating for a moment before slowly following up. The two of them walked out of the hotel, one in front and one behind, Qi Yan taking big steps and walking on their own, only to notice that Yun Qing had not followed. He stopped in place and waited for her for a while, then asked her, "Where is the car parked?" "You didn't ask me earlier, didn't you? Run quite fast. Am I afraid that those people will chase me out and drag me back to drink?" Yun Qing only then noticed that he was speaking without any alcohol tonight and said, "You didn't drink tonight." "I didn't tell you that my throat was uncomfortable," he said before giving a symbolic dry cough twice. Yun Qing said, "The car is in the open parking lot across from me." He asked, "Why don't you stop in the hotel garage?" "When I arrived, there was a traffic jam at the intersection of the hotel garage." The two walked to the intersection ahead and waited for the green light. Yun Qing's height of 1.75 meters is covered by his figure of 1.88 meters. He leaned over and lowered his eyes slightly to see her calm and composed demeanor, as if this noisy world had nothing to do with her. Yun Qing felt his gaze stagnating on himself and turned his head to look. He rubbed his nostrils and quickly turned around, staring at the red street light timer ahead. When the red light changed to green, Qi Yan followed the hurried crowd towards the opposite side, with the cloud slightly lagging behind. Unexpectedly, as she was about to follow her, someone hugged her waist from behind and pulled her back onto the sidewalk, saying, "Yun Qing, you slut. How could I have fallen to this point if it weren't for you?" Yun Qing struggled and said, "You let go of me." Yu Jiming hugged her tighter and dragged her towards the dark alley next to him, with a gloomy and seeping laughter. "Didn't Qi Yan like you? Didn't he refuse to let me touch you? I insisted on touching you and sleeping with you. Not only do I want to sleep with you, but I also need to take photos, record videos and send them to him, and share them online to show everyone what kind of person you are, Yun Qing." Yun Qing tried to hit his head with the chain in her hand, but her arms were tightly restrained by his and she couldn't lift them up. She tried to use her legs again, but unfortunately she was dragged from behind by him, and in order to support her body as much as possible, her legs couldn't exert any force. Her pleading gaze turned towards the other side, and Qi Yan was nowhere to be seen in the bustling street. However, she saw Qi Yan rushing towards her in the endless traffic on the road, completely disregarding her own safety. She saw Qi Yan almost being hit by a car, and the driver lowered the car window and cursed at his fast-running figure several times. Qi Yan turned a deaf ear and continued to pass through one vehicle after another due to his forced acceleration or emergency braking, causing a lot of scolding. After a thrilling moment, he stepped onto the street and quickly ran to Yun Qing's side. He lifted his foot and kicked Yu Jiming on the shoulder, while quickly pulling Yun Qing down behind him. Yu Jiming was kicked and stumbled back several steps. He released Yun Qing and stepped forward, grabbed the man's collar and punched him in the face one after another. Every punch was stronger than the first one, and Yu Jiming was bleeding from his mouth and nose before he could stop. He is a devil who has emerged from the cocoon of hell, and every time his violence is like tearing this person apart, unwilling to leave him with any lingering vitality. Yun Qing stood beside him with a cold gaze like an outsider, without any intention of coming forward to dissuade him. She saw blood dripping from Yu Jiming's mouth and nose onto the ground, and a cold smile slowly rose from the corner of her lips, like the other side flower blooming in the underworld, enchanting and bloodthirsty. Just now, Yun Qing was held hostage by Yu Jiming and no one was watching. At most, everyone just glanced curiously and walked away. This will watch as Qi Yan beats the crowd of onlookers and surrounds the three of them in a small circle, whispering and discussing. Someone said, "Isn't this killing someone and hitting them to death?" Someone said, "This fight is too fierce. What kind of grudges and grievances is there?" Someone glanced at Yun Qing a few times and hastily declared, "It's another story of two men competing for one woman." Yun Qing also heard someone calling the police. She shook off a cold smile. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Being teased, he stands out for her, too. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Being teased, he stands out for her, too. When the police arrived, Qi Yan had already let go of Yu Jiming and calmly stood by wiping his hands. Yu Jiming lay on the ground, with a blue nose and swollen face, bloodstains all over his face, but he still stared at Yun Qing with a dazed smile. The police officer asked, "Why did you hit someone?" Qi Yan took out a cigarette from his wallet and lit it, feeling displeased. He said with a stern expression, "He has violated my friend." The police officer scanned the crowd and said, "Where is your friend?" Qi Yan's arrogant gaze deliberately glanced out of the crowd and said, "I'm leaving. Call your friend to come back. We need to investigate and inquire about the situation with your friend. Do you know what's going on? I said he was teasing my friend, so I beat him up. There's so much going on. If you don't believe me, you can handle it as you please." The police officer was annoyed and said, "What attitude are you having?" Qi Yan didn't care. "That's the attitude." The police officer was too lazy to argue with him and said, "Let's go. Follow me back to the police station. Just go, go." He followed the police officer and turned to walk out of the crowd, catching a glimpse of Yun Qing. Then, taking advantage of the police not paying attention, he threw the car key to her and tilted his head to look at the direction of the parking lot, gesturing for her to go back first. Yun Qing and Qi Yan have hardly ever spent time alone, so it is not clear what he actually looks like. But tonight's Qi Yan gave her a different feeling, a ferocity she had never seen before. She held the car key and watched as Qi Yan crawled into the police car on the roadside, watched the police officers close the car door, and watched the police car slowly move away from her sight. The person who stood out for Yun Qing in her 23-year life memory, apart from the boy she met at the age of 7, was Qi Yan who appeared tonight. "When I used to live in the Lin family, my cousin Lin Chao would bully her every time. When she was a child, she didn't have the ability to fight back and could only tell her parents. But almost without exception, my parents stood on my cousin's side, asking her to endure it for a while and even saying that she hadn't beaten her to death, howling or anything. As he grew older, Lin Chao bullied her again. She has learned and has the ability to fight back. But afterwards, she would always be scolded by her parents, asking if she wanted her uncle to sweep the three of them out. So, she started living on campus from middle school. During my university years, I would never return to the Lin family once a year." Yun Qing followed the police car to the police station and parked almost simultaneously in the parking space at the entrance of the courtyard. Qi Yan got off the car and saw her. He said angrily, "Who let you come?" Yu Jiming, who had been beaten to death, suddenly saw a starlight in his eyes when he saw Yun Qing. He exclaimed in surprise, "Qing, are you not trusting me?" Qi Yan heard disgust and lifted his foot to kick him in the calf, saying, "What are you shouting nonsense? Believe it or not, I castrated you on the spot." Yu Jiming seemed scared and immediately covered his lower body with his hands, hiding beside him. "Police officer, this person has hit me 3 times. Hurry up and catch him," he said. The police officer said sternly, "All right. We will investigate." Pointing at the man again, he said, "And you? We've all arrived at the police station. What else do you want to do?" Qi Yan gave him a disdainful glance, then raised his hand and gestured to walk towards Yu Jiming. He shrank behind the police officer, his eyes still squinting as he looked at Yun Qing, making her feel uncomfortable all over. Qi Yan also noticed Yu Jiming's frivolous gaze and wanted to rush over to beat him, but was promptly grabbed by the police. He pointed his index and middle fingers at his eyes and threatened, "If you look again, I'll immediately gouge out your eyeballs." Yu Jiming had no scruples at all, relying on the presence of police. In addition, he harbored a deep resentment towards Qi Yan for causing him to lose his reputation, which made him want to disgust Qi Yan. Not only did he look, but he also grinned and said, gently, "If you kneel down and beg me, I will let Qi Yan go." Now the police can't hold back Qi Yan. He struggled over and kicked Jiming hard with a few more kicks, saying harshly, "If you don't shut up, I'll keep you from seeing the sun tomorrow." Yu Jiming pulled on the police uniform and dodged him as he walked forward, saying in terror, "Comrade police officer, he wants to kill me. Hurry up and catch him." The police officer tugged at his throat and said, "All right. You two should be honest with me. Especially educating Qi Yan. Especially you, this is the police station. Now it's a rule of law society, when you're in the underworld." Qi Yan retorted displeasedly, "Since it's a rule of law society, how dare he still flirt with women in public?" The police couldn't find a suitable vocabulary to answer the conversation at the moment. Leading 3 people inside, hoping to have a better understanding of the situation. But Yu Jiming's gaze was always fixed on Yun Qing, who was lost in thought. Whenever you were not paying attention, 1 or 2 ambiguous and frivolous words would pop out. Qi Yan couldn't help but want to go up and beat him up. The police were educating and persuading on both sides. Finally, I learned about the specific situation on site from Yun Qing. However, Yu Jiming seemed a bit mentally abnormal and kept pushing towards Yun Qing. Qi Yan couldn't bear his shameless behavior, even if stopped by the police, he couldn't stop his anger at this moment. For a moment, the scene became somewhat chaotic. The reprimands of the police, the teasing words of Yu Jiming, Qi Yan's anger, and the conversation between Yun Qing and another police officer on the side. 2 police officers were restraining Qi Yan, and one of them waved his hand to ask someone to take Yu Jiming to another room. Yu Jiming became anxious when he saw that he was going to be taken away. He violently broke free from the police officer's hands and rushed frantically to Yun Qing, hugging her and kissing her on the face, as if to completely anger Qi Yan. Qi Yan was furious and didn't care who was pulling him. He either kicked or kicked when he raised his foot, shouting, "Let go of me. I'm going to kill this turtle grandson." Bang! The crisp sound instantly brought the room back to tranquility. Yun Qing saw the shattered ceramic cup falling to the ground, with hot water dripping down Jiming's forehead. The tea leaves soaked several times were soft and pressed against his face, causing his slightly aged face to turn slightly red. He seemed to feel no pain and continued to grin lightly at Yun, even sticking out his tongue to lick the tea leaves on his lips. Light. The police couldn't bear to listen anymore. In order to prevent Qi Yan from completely losing control, they even dragged Yu Jiming to another room. There is also Yun Qing, who exudes a detached and aloof demeanor in front of the camera in his daily life. Unexpectedly, even when he gets angry, he cannot be underestimated. Yun Qing calmly bent down to pick up the broken porcelain pieces on the ground and said calmly, "How do you plan to handle this matter?" The police picked up the broken porcelain pieces on the table and threw them into the trash can under their feet. "Miss Yun, this person is a bit bold. However, I seem to be a bit mentally abnormal when I look at him." Qi Yan shook off the arms of the 2 police officers and strode over to the table, propping his hands on the table. He completely refused the police officer's defense for Yu Jiming, saying, if you're mentally abnormal, you can act recklessly. Did I kill all of you and tell you that I'm mentally ill, so I'm not guilty? The police officer explained with a smile, Sir, I was just speculating. Whether there is a mental problem or not still requires professional identification from a doctor. Qi Yan wanted to angrily ask again, but Yun Qing tugged at the corner of his clothes under the table and calmly asked, if it is determined that there is no mental problem, how will this situation usually be handled? The person said in an official tone, it depends on the specific situation. Qi Yan questioned, is this situation not clear enough? He said, we understand the situation. But based on the situation at the scene, we need to assess the person's mental condition. Moreover, you also beat him up. Qi Yan retorted, you have been bullied, don't you resist? The police officer was speechless and felt that Qi Yan was a bit difficult to deal with. He turned to look at Yun Qing and said, Miss Yun, rest assured that we will handle this matter well. Yun Qing stood up expressionlessly and went out, standing in the corridor to call the lawyer. The two of them chatted for about 10 minutes, waiting for her to come back. Their tone was faint and they said, my lawyer will come over soon. The police officer smiled and said, Miss Yun, please rest assured that we will handle it as soon as possible. Yun Qing refused to sign any documents and waited for the lawyer to arrive. They whispered a few words and entrusted all matters to the lawyer, then left the police station with Qi Yan. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Huan Feiyan Shou, which category do you think I lack? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Huan Feiyan Shou, which category do you think I lack? The Sheng song of the night fell asleep. The quiet streets, mixed with the sound of wind blowing leaves and rain pouring in through the gaps of car windows, bring the chill of early winter. Yun Qing closed the car window tightly, and soon there was a slight fog inside the car. She reached out to turn on the hot air, dispelled the mist, and turned her head to look at Qi Yan, saying, where are you going back? He rubbed his hungry stomach and searched outside the car window, pointing to a distant fork in the road. Just put me down there, he said in no time. We arrived at the fork in the road, and Yun Qing parked the car. Qi Yan pushed the door down, wrapped his arms tightly in his baseball suit, walked to the noodle stand, ordered 2 or 2 sides, and then sat down at the low table next to him. Yun Qing sat in the car and watched for a while, thinking about the ferocity and righteousness that Qi Yan had unleashed tonight, as if this was not the Qi Yan she knew. She pushed the door and got off the car, didn't order anything, but paid Qi Yan's face money. Walking over and sitting opposite him, he took out a tissue and wiped the oil on the yellow table, saying, thank you tonight. It's a small matter. He picked up a pair of disposable chopsticks, opened them, took the noodles sent by the boss, stirred them a few times, and picked up a small chopstick to dissipate the heat and put it into his mouth. After chewing and swallowing, or afraid of Yun Qing overthinking, he emphasized, but don't think I have anything to do with you. If someone else gets teased tonight, I will also take action. Yun Qing soberly said, I didn't think so. Soft and delicate raindrops gracefully fell around them, jumping like chopped diamonds in a series in the yellowed light, enveloped in a delicate beauty amidst desolation. Qi Yan raised his eyes to look at her, with his eyes facing each other. Yun Qing smiled and he also laughed, as if the night suddenly had a spring vitality. Qi Yan continued to lower his head to eat noodles, while Yun Qing seemed to suddenly remember and spoke up, regarding the matter between you and Li Yun, let's talk to Huai Ji. He looked up and asked her, in your eyes, am I so foolish? Yun Qing suddenly understood that he had all these things in mind. With an apologetic smile, he heard him playfully say, I can't tell you're not very famous, and you've made the old man crazy about you. She wrapped her hands in her purse and leaned back slightly, teasing, Dong Qi chose me as his daughter-in-law because I was beautiful. He suddenly stopped picking noodles and stared at her in amazement for a few seconds. The light in his eyes flickered, as if distinguishing something. He nodded angrily and said, that's right. After a while, Qi Yan put down his chopsticks and sneered, however, I've played with so many women in the past 2 years, so you really don't have any resentment. She felt there was no need to hide it in front of him and said straightforwardly, I'm grateful they didn't even have time. I don't have to serve my husband and enjoy all the treatment that Mrs. Qi deserves. Why complain? Saying nothing is false. But now she's connected, and this marriage may not be possible for a while, so everyone gets along peacefully and plays their own games. So, would you like to host a banquet one day to thank my beautiful confidants? She smiled in response and said, I'm fine. As long as you can control the situation then. Qi Yan lit a cigarette and his pair of obsidian black pupils were unpredictable. I underestimated you before, he said. EP1-10 belongs to a high-end residential area in He City, with a green area of 40%, even in the presence of street lights, it still feels dark in the community. She turned on and off the distant lights before feeling clear in front of her. Seeing so late at night, there were still people who wrapped themselves in thin down jackets and went out. When the car passed by this person, Qi Yan deliberately lowered the car window and glanced out a few times. She asked, do you know each other? He closed the car window and said, I made a mistake. A few minutes later, Yun Qing stopped in front of a typical Song's courtyard. Qi Yan unbuttoned his seatbelt and glanced at the time on the display screen, saying, don't go back. I said it's late. Don't go back. What do you mean, I'll stay with you tonight? Yun Qing asked with a vague understanding. He laughed at the caution in her voice and said, you're not sleeping with me again, what are you afraid of? Yun Qing turned his head and silently scrutinized him. If you're really worried about what I'll do to you, then do as you please. After saying that, he pushed the door open and got off the car. She sat in the car without any movement as Qi Yan walked around the front of the car towards the house. She saw the wound on the back of his hand, thinking it was accidentally caused when he hit someone just now. She hesitated to come down and slowly followed Qi Yan's pace. He walked past the small garden in front of the house, stood at the door and turned to look at her before opening the door again and entering the house. He changed his shoes, took out a brand new pair of slippers from the cabinet, and placed them at the door, then went in first. Yun Qing had not yet entered the house, but just stood at the door and was shivered with excitement by the cold-toned decoration inside. Although it was not her first time coming, if it weren't for Qi Yan's sound coming from inside the house, she would have thought she had walked into the morgue on this big night. She changed into slippers and came in, instinctively rubbing her arms. Qi Yan saw it and came over with 2 cups of warm water, handing her a cup. Then he walked into the living room and quietly turned on the air conditioning inside. At this season, the heating in He City is turned on a bit earlier, let alone the preheating time is longer than the air conditioning. He leaned against the column next to the suspended TV wall with one hand in his pocket and drank water. He extended his index finger and pointed to the room on the right side of the second floor, saying, you can sleep in that room tonight. Everything inside is clean. You can order whatever you want. Yun Qing drank water and pointed to his hand, do you want to treat your injury? He looked down and said, a little injury, it's okay. Let's handle it. She put down the water glass and asked where the medicine box was. Qi Yan pointed to the cabinet under the TV. She walked over and took it out, squatted on the sofa and opened it, making a sound for him to come over. He lifted his hand and saw that the skin on the back of his hand was torn, with small blood droplets scabbing around it. To be honest, this cannot be considered an injury to him at all. He moved his fingers and looked at Yun Qing looking for medicine. He walked slowly and sat down on the sofa, his hand on his knee. Yun Qing crouched on the ground with one knee touching the bottom, holding a cotton swab dipped in iodine and preparing to apply his wound, but he promptly withdrew his hand. Yun Qing looked at him puzzled. He sneered and asked, isn't it really touching to suddenly be so attentive to me? She was too lazy to explain to him and looked at him with blank eyes, saying, are you taking the medicine or not? Up. Up. Then, he reached out his hand. But before Yun Qing could touch it, he pulled it back. This time, he took the cotton swab from her hand and wiped the wound himself, saying, "I love to play. But I'm most afraid of provoking innocent women." Yun Qing choked on him and said, "So, are you still standing up for me tonight?" He threw the dirty cotton swab into the trash can, grabbed the medicine box himself, took out a cotton swab dipped in iodine, and continued to wipe it. "My head was feverish for a moment," he said. She tidied up the medicine box and said, "Whether you have a fever or not, I want to thank you tonight." Qi Yan sneered and said, "Girl, hero-saving beauty is a common pursuit method for men to pursue women. Don't think that men treat you like this, but in fact, they just want to sleep with you." She looked at him calmly and asked, "And you?" Qi Yan tilted his head to look at her, and the glass light fell into his obscene pupils from the top of his head, like stars building nests inside. He deliberately leaned closer, his voice emitting a mellow and profound voice like wine. "What kind of fat do you think I lack?" Yun Qing instantly felt a slap in the face, glared angrily at him, quickly packed the medicine box and sent it back to its original position. Looking at her distinct appearance, he chuckled lightly, threw it away in front of him, stood up and strode upstairs, saying, "Go to bed early, I'll go back to my room first." However, he stopped on the second floor, rested one hand on the solid wooden railing, and looked sideways. "There's more." He suddenly stopped. Yun Qing waited for a moment, but there was no further message from him. In an unhappy tone, he asked, "What else is there?" "It's okay. Go to bed early." He stood up straight and gently patted the railing back into the room. Yun Qing always felt that he had something to say. But he didn't want to say it, and she didn't want to delve deeper into it. After drinking water, she took the cup that Qi Yan had drunk and went to the kitchen to wash it clean. Her gaze slowly wandered through the room, with each tone filled with elegance and a lazy vibe, which quite matched his personality. The book Ziji Tongjian, with small labels placed on the living room coffee table, doesn't seem like a book he would read. So much so that she curiously picked it up and flipped through it. There were not only paragraphs marked with 4 or 5 colored pens, but also notes with handwritten strokes, which seemed to have been carefully read. This is really beyond her expectations. Yun Qing stood there for a brief look, and when he returned to his room, it was already past 2 in the morning. The decoration inside the room was very simple. After finding a clean towel and toothbrush in the bathroom, she took off her coat and fell into a deep sleep on the bed. The next morning, Yun Qing was awakened by intermittent squeaking sounds. She got up with her clothes on and followed the sound to the room next to the projection room in the basement. She saw Qi Yan holding a chainsaw sawing wood, and on the cutting board covered with various materials and tools, there was an unfinished model car stained with a lot of sawdust inside and outside. Qi Yan saw her and turned off the chainsaw, saying, "Did I disturb you?" She looked at him wearing a leather apron, with sleeves on his forearms, giving him the appearance of a skilled craftsman. It was as if the traditional craftsman's spirit had softened his delicate and imposing features, and the elegant charm seemed to have infiltrated his bone marrow. This will completely eliminate last night's carefree behavior. Yun Qing picked up a small figurine he had carved on the table and admired it, saying, "Do you still know how to do these things?" "I have nothing to do but play. Isn't Qi Dong asking you to work at the company?" He smiled and said, "I'm okay with these boring things. If I go into business, I'm afraid it might lead to Qi's bankruptcy." She put down the things in her hand, picked up another one and looked at it. Then she looked at the unfinished model car on the table and said, "Is this ready to drive?" A model car is roughly the size of a children's toy car sold in a shopping mall, and can be taken in one size, one big and one small. It should be possible. If Qi went bankrupt that day, perhaps you could use this to get rich. Qi Yan only laughed as a joke and joked, "If you get married and have children again that day, I can give it to your child." Yun Qing shrugged and said, "I guess you'll have to keep your car for yourself." "Yes, it seems like they are from the same path. Freedom is the poppy. Qi Yan looked into her gaze, with a smile of appreciation and agreement buried in it, like a planet cutting through the night sky and setting a spark. At this moment, the phone in Yun Qing's hand rang, disturbing her to enjoy art. She continued on the phone and walked outside. What's wrong? Lin Bei's tone was cheerful. Sister, you're on the trending list. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. He asks. Are you afraid of falling in love with me? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. He asks. Are you afraid of falling in love with me? In the next second, Yun Qing hung up the phone and opened the app, seeing a prominent line of text. Qi Yan, the heir of the Qi family, fought fiercely with a man on the street for a daughter. The gossip is full of reports about Qi Yan's jealous behavior. In the picture, she is hidden in the crowd, with dim lighting. If it weren't for someone very familiar, it wouldn't be possible to recognize her. Yun Qing turned around and looked at Qi Yan, who was also on the phone, intending to tell him about this matter. But he walked past her with a calm expression. His apron and sleeves had already been taken off. Now wearing a gray hoodie suit with a black and white baseball jersey on the outside, my steps are carefree and casual. She followed behind him, listening as if he was also talking about making headlines. Waiting for him to end the call, before Yun Qing could speak, he said, I will solve this matter. Regarding this matter, her attitude was indifferent. You can't tell from the picture that it's me either. He was very serious and said, if you are a public figure and in a period of career growth, it would be better to avoid getting involved with me. She said, black and red are also red. Qi Yan tilted his head and glanced at her, then put down his phone and walked into the kitchen. Take warm milk, eggs, xiaolongbao and braised wheat out of the steamed rice griddle. I made some at random. Yun Qing opened his chair and sat down, took a sip of milk, then reached out to pick up an egg, smashed the eggshell, and peeled it to eat. The atmosphere at the dinner table was very quiet, and Qi Yan hardly ate much. He just finished drinking the milk, grabbed a xiaolongbao, bit it, put it down, and kept sending messages and emails. He was very busy. Yun Qing didn't make any plans today, but he stopped eating as he slowly enjoyed his meal. Just tidy up the dining table, seal the leftovers with plastic wrap and put them in the refrigerator. She had intended to say hello to him, but there was no one else in the living room, so she left without saying anything. Within 2 days of this incident being reported, the story of Qi Yan and Li Yun has been on the hot search list for several consecutive days under the criticism of tabloid reporters. Various hints were made in lengthy texts that Qi Yan used his power to threaten and intimidate Li Yun into having sexual relations with him. Later, the woman became pregnant and was forced to have her child aborted. His image is already not good, which will lead to a bottoming out and everyone will punish him. These 2 incidents also directly affected Qi, resulting in a very unfavorable position in the competition with Busheng. Qi Suehe is busy dealing with business matters and has no time to take care of Qi Yan's side. Yun Qing scrolled through Weibo, pondering whether he was saving himself or sending him a message. Do you need me to come forward and clarify? When she received the phone call from Yuan Shuwei, she received his reply, no need. You don't need to worry about this matter. Yuan Shuwei has been busy with work these days, thinking about what she said that night. She no longer asked her, but directly told herself to pick her up half an hour later. Yun Qing was still pondering excuses in her mind, but the other party had already hung up the phone, seemingly not giving her any chance to refuse. The next second, she received a call from her agent, Ms. Wang, who gave her several reminders and spent her lips talking about the importance of this Wu's advertisement to her. The brokerage company was not aware that she was married to Qi Yan, and thought that Qi Suehe was taking care of her only because of the appreciation of her elders towards her juniors. And as she said, Qi Suehe cannot control everything on this chain of interests. Half an hour later, the black Mercedes-Benz business car stopped at her doorstep. Yun Qing came out of the room, and the driver helped open the car door. The original book sat leisurely inside, with a smile on its cheeks and a few shallow wrinkles at the end of its eyes. She sat in with her coat in hand and said, "Mr. Yuan." Yuan Shui's smile deepened and he said, "Did I not disturb Miss Yun?" She gave a casual smile without hesitation. He explained to himself, "I also asked your agent and said you're okay today." She joked, "Mr. Yuan has only been so familiar with Sister Wang for a few days now. Whether you're familiar or not sometimes depends on the person." Yun Qing smiled in response, holding his chin and looking out the window. Her long hair fell from her shoulder, and she didn't notice the hand that Yuan Shui had reached out to help her lift it. It wasn't until his warm fingers touched her cold cheek that he realized it. Yun Qing moved his body towards the car window. Yuan Shui's gaze brushed against her smooth and dark long hair and froze on her creamy face, saying, "Miss Yun, do you pray for blessings every day?" "No. Miss Yun doesn't have any wishes." Yun Qing turned to look at him, his eyes silent as autumn. "Yuan Zong, you are neither Buddha nor Jesus. Even if I seem to have it, I cannot make a wish to you." The original book smiled faintly and said, "You speak quite amusingly." She responded with a smile. "On the way, due to boredom, I played with my phone for a while, and Yuan Shui occasionally talked to her for a while, and she also answered her questions if there was anything else. A regular chat between two people seems to be a sparring, wanting to compete." As the car drove out of the city towards the mountains in the suburbs, halfway up the mountain, I looked up and saw a foggy area, unable to see the road ahead clearly. All the vehicles coming and going were driving with their headlights on, moving up and down at a slow speed, like snails crawling in the jungle. The original book only asked the driver to raise the temperature inside the car a bit, and looked at her thin woolen coat, thinking that she might get cold after getting off the car later. He held his phone and silently sent a message to someone. Waiting for them to arrive at the parking lot outside the temple, the three of them sat in the car and hesitated to get off. The original book refused to let the driver turn off the engine and just left the air conditioning on. About an hour later, he received a phone call. In no time, Yun Qing saw a man appear outside the car, holding a black bag in his hand. He took the car window, took the bag from the man's hand, and slowly closed the car door. Then he took out a long white down jacket from the bag and handed it to Yun Qing, saying, "Put this on. The temperature on the mountain is low, and wearing a coat will make it cold inside." Originally, this over an hour was just waiting for someone to give her a down jacket. Yun Qing had an indescribable feeling in his heart. She was somewhat flattered and took it over, but didn't take off her coat. She just wrapped it around the outside, just enough to fit the length of her coat, and her slender and tall figure made it look good to wear. Yuan Shui saw that she didn't zip up and wanted to bend down to pull it up for her. She quickly refused and turned to pull up the zipper of her down jacket. In this way, her whole body seemed to be wrapped in a ball of white snow, setting off her beauty with a pure tone. The cold wind blew mist onto her long eyelashes, and her brown eyes seemed to be immersed in the clear and transparent water. A girl in her early 20s should be the most stunning period of beauty among women. Maturity is filled with bitterness, like blooming flowers, more like the moon hiding behind the treetops at midnight, dazzling the night sky. The driver came over with an umbrella, and Yuan Shui took it and propped it on top of their heads. Yun Qing looked up and pulled the hat from his down jacket over his head. He stood outside the umbrella and said, "I'm not used to holding an umbrella." The original book simply put away the umbrella and used it as a crutch, saying, "You have hostility towards me. I am not related to Mr. Yuan, and we don't even have a basic cooperative relationship. It's normal for me to be a little wary of you taking care of me like this. Can I understand Miss Yun's fear of falling in love with me?" End of this chapter. Chapter 10. She, love name and lovely, will not love him. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. She, love name and lovely, will not love him. Yun Qing stopped at the step, and the wild grass next to him stretched out. The fine thorns on the vine scraped a small scratch on the down jacket. She looked at Yuan Shu with a sarcastic smile wrapped in a chill and said, "I'm not sure who I've liked since I've grown up." Yuan Shu used the umbrella in her hand to not open the vine hanging on her clothes, and her voice was warm and mellow. "It's still clear now. Yun Qing feels that this person is really confident. However, his confidence is not annoying. For a while, she couldn't explain why, perhaps it was the charm of money." The two of them continued to walk forward, almost reaching the front of the hall. Yun Qing received a call from Lin Bei and spoke anxiously, "Sister, just now Li Yun posted on Weibo saying that you are an accomplice of Qi Yan. But in less than 2 minutes, I clicked on this Weibo and couldn't find it anymore." Due to the fact that the original book was only beside her, she only gave a faint nod. Lin Bei asserted, "Such swift and decisive actions are very much like the means of Qi Dong." The original book lowered its gaze and looked at Yun Qing, thinking that it had heard Lin Bei's words. She moved aside to widen the distance between the two and briefly spoke to Lin Bei before ending the call. She accompanied him into the palace, with not many people. He, like others, burned incense and knelt devoutly, and later even went to light lamps and pray for his wife's blessings. She stood outside, leaning against the wall with her hands in her pockets, waiting, occasionally glancing inside, feeling that this man was really a bit hypocritical. "On the other side, I remember my wife, and on the other side, I want to have romantic relationships with her. It seems that warmth and romance can always coexist harmoniously in a man's world." She smiled sarcastically and with a cool smile, and when the original book came out to pray for blessings, she asked, "What are you laughing at?" She shook her head and stood straight, saying, "Are you okay? Don't you say goodbye." Yun Qing lifted his foot and walked down the mountain, saying, "I worship myself every day." Yuan Shu smiled and stopped her, saying, "Since you're here, have a fast before you leave. This is indeed a meal order." The two of them walked into the vegetarian hall with the driver and bought 3 portions of vegetarian food. The driver sat on the side, holding it, across the aisle from the table where the two of them were sitting. Yun Qing picked up a section of green vegetables wrapped in a little rice and delivered it to his entrance. He heard Yuan Shu say, "Master Qi had a fight with someone at the hotel entrance that night, was it because of you? This doesn't seem like an inquiry." He deliberately called him a young master, and it was even more sarcastic. It is obvious that the original book cannot match Qi Yan. Yun Qing lifted his eyes and glanced out the window, where the mist shrouded the true colors of the mountains and forests. She knew that Qi Yan was out of tune, but this incident was indeed taken advantage of by someone with intentions. He shouldn't have been misunderstood, so she explained, "He just saw the road was rough." "It seems that you are very familiar with Master Qi. Is Mr. Yuan gossiping like this?" He bluntly said, "I'm just interested in things related to Miss Yun." Yun eats in a muffled voice. Yuan Shu took a sip of soup and said, "I heard that Miss Yun has been able to develop so smoothly in the past 2 years, largely because of Qi Dong." Her tone was half true and half false. "Qi Dong likes me and wants me to be her daughter. In law, so he takes special care of me." The original book only gazed at her, with sharp eyes as calm as the deep sea, making it impossible to see through. His gaze was not scorching, but Yun Qing felt a warm current attacking him. The temperature was suitable, just like the warmth of his age. In a moment, he lowered his gaze and asked naked, "What do you want?" Yun Qing paused with his chopsticks and a wry smile crossed his eyebrows and eyes, saying, "Mr. Yuan, what are you planning to give me?" "I can give you whatever you want. Is it a transaction?" Yun Qing put down his chopsticks, wrapped his arms around his abdomen, and his eyes were indifferent. "I'll give you my young and beautiful body, and you'll give me money, fame, and fortune. Is that right?" The original book hesitated slightly and said, "It seems that you're right to say that. Mr. Yuan, I have great ambitions and love fame and fortune. But I will never fall in love with a man who has a wife. Yun Qing got up from his position, took off his down jacket, and turned to walk outside the studio. Yuan Shuwei sat in her seat and turned to watch her figure slowly descend the mountain. She was stubborn and wrapped in a black coat, hiding in the White Mountains. Yun Qing fortunately wore a pair of flat-bottomed short boots today. She faced the drizzle and stepped on the wet road with her shoes, splashing small stains and dirtying the corners of her coat. She was paying attention to avoiding traffic while thinking that today's situation was not the first time she had entered the industry. If she had been obedient from the beginning, there wouldn't have been a ridiculous marriage with Qi Yan. However, she has been subjected to harsh looks and ridicule at the Lin family since childhood, unwilling to push herself into bigger and crazier jokes again. She doesn't have a strong sense of morality, but she can't transfer the peace of mind of using the Qi family to play tricks on men with power and family. All of this is different from her relationship with the Qi family and Qi Yan. Strictly speaking, she and Qi Yan are about the same as each other. He was beaming with joy, her picture name. She was too immersed in her own thoughts and did not notice the vehicle of Yuan Shuwei slowly coming from above. When passing by her side, he did not instruct the driver to stop. Just looking at her from the car was nothing more than trying to polish her pride. It wasn't until the vehicle drove away that Yun Qing looked up and glanced at it. But the next second, the car turned and disappeared from her view. Actually, she called Lin Bei just now when she came out of the Zhaitang, and this should be on her way. She just regretted not impulsively leaving the temple earlier. Yun Qing has been walking for almost half an hour, and the rain in the mountains is getting heavier and the fog is getting thicker. The gray sky is almost approaching evening. Her body was slightly feverish and she felt fine sweat oozing from her back. She took out her phone to call Lin Bei, but after changing angles, there was no signal. At this moment, a white Porsche suddenly stopped not far in front of her, waiting for her to approach. Qi Yan poked his head out of it and said, "The old man is getting rid of you and leaving on his own." Yun glanced at him lightly and without asking, he opened the rear car door and sat in. "I just noticed that there is still a woman sitting on the passenger seat." She hesitated as she closed the door, wondering if she wanted to go down. After pondering for a few seconds, she still closed the car door and said awkwardly, "Just take me to the foot of the mountain. Xiao Bei is on his way here." Qi Yan didn't say anything. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror and released the brake to head down the mountain. She turned her head to look out the window, occasionally lowering her gaze to check if her phone had any signal. Feeling the woman casting a scrutinizing gaze from the front, she turned back to look. The woman gave her a friendly smile and straightened her body. Yun Qing realized that she was different from the women Qi Yan interacts with on a daily basis. She is not particularly beautiful, but her delicate features give a sense of comfort and pleasure, and her clear and clean apricot eyes exude a heroic aura. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart that Qi Yan still had a good eye. At the foot of the mountain, Qi Yan parked the car on the roadside. She said thank you and was about to push the door to get off when Qi Yan suddenly said, "Wait a minute." Yun Qing asked, "Is there anything else?" End of this chapter.